Hey Aya, today we are going to take a look at civilizations that disappeared or almost got wiped away. Sometimes they got lost because of colonization, others because of environmental changes. First, there are short mentions of torture, slavery. If you don't want to watch right now, I completely understand. Like with everything, there are positive and negative effects. Let's start with positive effects of colonization. Education. Colonialism falls into two broad categories: settler colonialism, which turned out to be the case with the American colonies, and then there's exploitation colonialism, where the nation was subjugated, enslaved, and bled dry, so as to speak. But one of the after effects of colonial takeover was the focus and emphasis on education, where the locals were taught the Queen's language to help facilitate communication as well as imparted key skills. The fact remains that the system of 3 R's, or writing, reading and arithmetic, was introduced by the settlers, and this emphasis on education continued well after the colonial powers had left the host nation. In fact, some of the nations excelling in various fields of education happen to be nations like India and Australia. While India became the jewel in the crown, Australia became a penal colony for the Brits. Infrastructure. The colonial powers spent vast amounts of money and labor building key essential infrastructure in the colonies. This largesse was not aimed at improving the quality of living for the locals, but was rather aimed at making life cozy for their compatriots. Whatever be the motivation, the fact is that some of the colonial expansion saw vast roads, train tracks being built to ferry lots of people with the sole purpose of facilitating transportation between different places in the country. Nevertheless, these tracks still remain, and some of them in rather good condition, and are still used today to ferry people from one point to another. Health. With the introduction of Western medicine, better sanitation, and sanitary habits, the life expectancy of both the colonialists and the natives vastly improved. What this did was to usher in a medical revolution of sorts. Now the local populations were able to get treated effectively for whatever it was that they had. Now, what are the negative effects? Slavery. This is what started of colonialism: abject slavery. After the subjugation of a land, the natives were often forcibly taken away on slave ships to be sold as a commodity in different ports, or they would be taken back to the mother country for re-education. The change in location did not matter, for as slaves they did not have right to freedom, or for that matter, for free, radical thoughts. The colonists often forced them to work on fields and farms with little or no pay under some of the most abject conditions, resulting in the victim often being affected psychologically. Local traditions and cultures. The colonists often paid little or no heed to the local customs, traditions. Instead, they forced the locals to worship only Christianity, and to give everything else a miss. Naturally, some of the natives resisted this idea, and as a result, they were often tortured for days on end before being executed. Natural resources. Minerals. Most of the natural resources in the form of timber and other valuable wood was cut down and shipped off to home country. And various precious minerals were dug up from ground and then sent back home, with the rest of the loot. The greed of the colonists was so much that they even defaced various idols and temples to get to the treasure. There are a few communities that still practice the way their ancestors did. Here are a few ancient groups that still exist today. The Maya are perhaps the classic example of a civilization that was completely lost. Its great monuments, cities and roads swallowed up by the Central American jungles, and its people scattered to small villages. Though the languages and traditions of the Maya still survive up to the present day, the civilization's peak was during the first millennium AD, when their greatest architectural feats and massive agricultural projects covered a vast region in the Yucatan today, an area stretching from Mexico to Guatemala and Belize. One of the largest Mesoamerican civilizations, the Maya made extensive use of writing, math, an elaborate calendar, and sophisticated engineering to build their pyramids and terraced farms. Although the people who settled in Mesopotamia are often credited as the first civilization, new research shows that Aboriginal Australians are one of the oldest known civilizations on Earth. The Aborigines can trace their ancestries back to about 75,000 years ago, but became a distinct genetic group around 50,000 years ago. It is believed that this ancient group of Aboriginal Australians first settled in Australia between 40,000 and 31,000 years ago. They are the direct ancestors of today's remaining Aboriginal tribes, and their culture has largely remained the same. The discovery of the human remains from Lake Mungo in New South Wales, Australia in 1969 show signs of being one of the oldest known cremations. The remains, which are known as the Mungo Woman, have been dated to about 24,719. 30 years ago. The San people of southern Africa trace their history directly to ancient peoples who lived around 140,000 to 100,000 years ago. In fact, the San are the direct descendants of one of the original ancestral human groups, haplogroup, making the San the oldest civilization in the world. In the past, the San were semi-nomadic hunter-gatherers, but today many San work as farm laborers, run nature conservancies, and other various small jobs as hunting and gathering alone is no longer sustainable. Recent archaeological finds have uncovered the oldest known ritual ceremonies, which have been attributed to the San. Archaeologists discovered 70,000-year-old spearheads in a cave in the Tsodilo Hills of Botswana that were sacrificed to the python. The Tsodilo Hills are also notable for being the site of the world's largest concentration of rock paintings. This art was also made by ancient San people. However, not every civilization survived. Here are a few that entirely got wiped away. One of the great civilizations of the ancient world is called simply the Indus or Harappan civilization. Thousands of years ago, it may have boasted up to 5 million people, almost 10% of the world's population, spread over a region that encompassed parts of today's India, Pakistan, Iran, and Afghanistan. But its grand walkways, with sophisticated roadside drainage, metallurgy shops, and massive, multi-story, brick hives of houses were abandoned over 3,000 years ago. It's likely that this ancient civilization, like the Maya, suffered from gradual changes in rainfall patterns that made it difficult for its peoples to raise enough food for their massive population. Often called the world's oldest city, Catalhoyuk was part of a large city-building and agricultural civilization thriving between 9,000 to 7,000 years ago in what is today south-central Turkey. What's interesting about Catalhoyuk is its structure, which is quite unlike most other cities since it contained no roads as we know them, and was instead built sort of like a hive, with houses built next to each other and entered through holes in the roofs. It's believed that people farmed everything from wheat to almonds outside the city walls, and got to their homes via ladders and sidewalks that traversed their roofs. Often, these people decorated the entrances to their homes with bull skulls, and buried the bones of their honored dead beneath the packed dirt of their floors. The civilization was pre-Iron Age and pre-literate, but they nevertheless left behind ample evidence of a sophisticated society, full of art and public ritual, that was possibly 10,000 strong at many points in its 2,000-year existence. Why did people eventually abandon the city? It is unknown. Cahokia. Long before Europeans made it to North America, the so-called Mississippians had built a great city surrounded by huge earthen pyramids and a Stonehenge-like structure made of wood to track the movements of the stars. Called Cahokia today, you can still see its remains in Illinois. At its height between 600 to 1400 AD, the city sprawled across 6 square miles, and contained almost 100 earthen mounds as well as an enormous grand plaza at its center. Its population might have been as much as 40,000 people, some of whom would have lived in outlying villages. The people of this great city, the biggest so far north in Mesoamerica, were brilliant artists, architects, and farmers, creating incredible art with shells, copper, and Dora stone. They even diverted a branch of the local Mississippi and Illinois rivers to suit their needs for irrigation. It's not entirely certain what led people to abandon the city starting in the 1200s, but some archaeologists say the city had always had problems with disease and famine. It had no sanitary system to speak of, and that people left for greener and healthier pastures elsewhere on the Mississippi River. Don't forget to check the description for the links and more info. I hope you learned more. See ya.